Hi, everybody. This is Karen. Welcome to the session. Let me look and see how many attendees we have. Actually, let's see. Maybe I'll wait a couple minutes. What Taylor's going to try to do is mute everybody's microphone, which is what we try to do during these, just to keep the background noise as minimal as possible. And then there's going to be time for a fair bit of discussion and asking of questions in a bit, and so she will open that back up when the time is
muted.
All right. Okay, now, okay, sorry, we just accidentally muted and unmuted me.
Muted there for a minute.
That's okay. All right. So I'm going to just quickly go over sort of the roadmap for the day. What we really want to do today is build on the little bit of playing around that we all got to do when we were together in June with an earlier version of the dashboard. And so what has happened in the last several months is that we took the feedback that you all provided in June about what was working or things that you'd like to see changed a little bit. We shared that with NBT. We came up with a new list of things that we wanted to see the dashboard be able to do. And what we're going to look at today, and what I know several of you have already looked at a little bit on your own, is the new and improved version of the dashboard. So we'll look at what's new and different. We want to provide more time than we had when we were together in June for you guys to poke around and make sure you know how to make the different pieces of the dashboard function. And then toward the end of the presentation, I'm going to share some examples that build on the using data to tell stories idea that we heard about in June and then again in September when we had Amanda with us. To think about how you might start doing data displays and data visualizations with some of the results that you now have easy access to thanks to the dashboard. All right, before we get going, I want to take a second to give some shout outs, which we always try to do. And really everybody deserves one, if not multiple shout outs in our opinion this month. So we want to say a huge thank you to all of the time that you guys have given. Some have already been asked to give more time than others. I think everybody's probably given about an hour and a half worth of time, if not 2.5 hours in December and January to do things to help us either record what's working well and what could be improved based on your experiences with EvalFest in year 2 through some of the research instruments you completed, through the interviews that you have or will do with Pat. And then about 15 of you are also being asked to spend an hour with Taylor and with me talking about and preparing for the new survey that we will launch by the end of this month. So we just wanted to thank all of you for making the time to do that and to sort of setting us up to be as successful as we can be in the new festival season. All right, a couple of rules of engagement for today. This is me. I'm your tour guide for the day. You can see I have a very smart hat. What we want to do is show you the updates and then take a break and have what will feel probably like some silent time at first so that you can poke around on your own data dashboard page. And so we're going to chop this into 3 different sections, one for each of the 3 pages on the dashboard. I'm going to be your tour guide and give you a quick tour of the updates and the functionality on the site. And then we're going to allow you to play and then ask some questions. I do want to set a couple of ground rules for the question piece. If you have the ability to take some notes on a separate piece of paper related to things that you suspect might be specific to your data and your page, then I'd like to ask you to do that on your own and on the side and to send those in to Taylor after the webinar today. If you have questions that you think everybody would benefit from and that will keep the conversation going and the webinar going, then we'd love for you to share those with the group. And so there will be pauses after each tour of each page so that everybody can play around with the functionality, and so that everybody can have time to reflect on what you're seeing, what you wish you were seeing that you weren't, and then maybe even how you're interpreting your data and what you might want to do or think about to share that information. Becky is saying that I am hard to hear. Is that true for other people? If you could just sort of type into the chat and let me know. Okay, I don't see any other chats. I'm going to keep going and hope that that has resolved itself. Thank you, Catherine. So as I was saying, if you have questions or interpretations you want to share, if you have questions about whether you're looking at something right, thinking about something right, whether questions about clarifying how to use the dashboard, those are all fair game for the public questions. If it's about your individual data or something about your individual piece, then please write that down and send it to Taylor in an email after, so that we can keep going. All right, if you are not already logged on, please open a separate window and log on to your dashboard page now. I am going to leave this screen, hopefully, so that you guys can see me walk through our dashboard page. So this is the login page. I know we have a couple of advisors on the line today. Each of these pages is specific to the festival. And so what you can see here is the email address associated with North Carolina's page. If you guys want to log in, feel free to do that. So the email username is EvalFestNC for the NC page. And then the password is that exact same thing, EvalFestNC, and then the @ symbol twice, and then 123. So the password is EvalFestNC @ 123. And Tina and Robert and any other advisors that have tuned in, feel free to log into our page if you want to be able to poke around and play on your own. All right, and here we go. So when you log on, the first page that you will see is this festival profile page. And for most of us, this page is going to look really similar to what we did see when we were together in June, but it's been cleaned up a bit. So the hope and expectation is that each of the 3 donut holes that you see has the sample size in the middle. You can see that we've changed this. There was some question when we met in June about what data we were actually looking at, whether it was 2015 data, 2016 data, or an aggregation of both. That has been separated out for you. So you can see now that you've got options for all of your data together or to look at it year by year. And NBT is in the process of setting this up so that the default year will always be the most recent year of data that you have collected. So 2016 is what should have popped up for everybody. Your sample sizes for each of these demographic categories are what you see in the middle of each of the donut charts. And so you can see we've got fewer data points for gender and ethnicity than we do for age. And that will be true for all of us based on how the questions are set up in QuickTap. So you guys will remember in 2016, we made a change to the formatting of the survey so that age is asked up front and of everyone. And then gender and ethnicity are only reported based on our IRB constraints for people 15 and older. So it should be the case that age has fewer data points than either of your other 2 categories. If you take your cursor and float it over any part of the donut chart, you'll see that that sample size number in the middle changes, and it becomes the percentage of people who are on the category that you are resting your cursor on. So female here, you can see it lights up in the key, the color changes slightly on the donut hole, and then we see the percentage in the center change as well. And that's true for all of the different pieces of all of the donut charts that we're looking at. We have also tried to standardize the way that our gender category was presented. Many of us had a varied and slightly wacky list of gender categories when we looked at these data in June. And we've asked NBT to focus on only the people who reported the traditional male or female categories, and so that's what you're seeing on your donut charts. The bottom of this is unchanged from when we looked at it together in June. I know many of you have some changes, including us here in North Carolina, that need to be made to the profile detail. If you want to send that to Taylor after the webinar, we can go ahead and start going on those changes as well. So what we're going to do now is take our first little break, and I'm going to ask you guys, if you aren't already on your pages, to shift over so that you can play around on your own page. Feel free to move back and forth however you want. Let us know if you have questions about how the page works, if you're not sure what it is you're looking at, or if you have any reactions, comments, interpretations that you want to share. And we'll take a couple of minutes and let everybody poke around. If you do have questions, if you could raise your hand. Taylor's going to look for the raised hand icons to pop up, and she'll unmute your mic so that everybody can hear whatever it is that you have to share.
Okay. Represented minority versus a non-underrepresented minority.
Paula, you are up for a question.
I put my hand down. You answered my question. I don't even know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Gotcha. Yes, I can hear you now. I unmuted you, but I'll mute you back.
Okay.
So I think that was the URM versus non-URM. So the data that we have on the race ethnicity question are obviously, as you know from your own databases, much more extensive than this. For the sake of simplicity and how we're presenting it here, we have asked NBT to just create these two categories, and it is underrepresented minority groups in STEM and those who are not in those categories. And roughly that breaks down to the white and Asian participants being in the non-URM group and the other categories in the URM category. All right, Roshni, it looks like you have a question. Hang on one second for me.
Yeah, could you just clarify what you were saying about taking out the, asking NBT to take out the information about people who responded differently than traditional male and female? Does it mean that it's just not reflected in this donut, or was there an issue with how it was being represented in the donut? I remember that before there was a lot of different answers that we thought were, but
yeah, so we've asked them to go in and code all of the different ways. Well, let me just say for the advisors on the line who may not be as familiar with this item, that we ask gender as an open-ended question instead of providing categories. And there was a lot of discussion about that, and people felt pretty passionately about the fact that that's the way that we should be handling this as a community. And so that is the way that we want to handle the data on the front end, and what the experience is like for the attendee. It creates all kinds of hassle on the analysis end with much more coding than any of us have ever probably done before when it comes to gender. And when we looked at these data in June, some people had 5 gender categories, some people had 2. And so for the purposes of trying to streamline the presentation, we've asked them to change the sample size so that it shows only those people who answered male or female, or something that we could comfortably code into male or female. So if somebody typed in an F, then we feel pretty comfortable assuming female, and they would be included in the sample size. If somebody typed in any of the range of the other, however many 100 plus gender identities there are now available on something like Facebook, those have been, they're still in your databases, but they're not being shown in this donut chart. Does that help, Roshni?
yes, okay. So, but it is, so it's just if they put an F, it's being coded as female, but if they did identify as transsexual, it would come up as transsexual. whatever.
It would come up as transsexual in your database. They would not be shown in this donut chart.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Karen, we have a question from Kishore asking if we are only asking questions about the profile page, not the comparison tools, correct?
Yes, Speedy. Please hold. If you guys have cruised ahead, that's awesome. Write down your questions so you don't forget them, and we'll get there in a couple minutes. Thank you, Kishore. Becky, it looks like you have a question too. I just unmuted your mic. Becky, did you have a question? Nope. Okay. So I'm going to turn that back off. And I think we're ready to move on. Clearly, Kishore has already done so. So the dashboard page is where I think you'll see the most changes since we met in June. We've asked them to do a lot to clean this up. And part of what you will notice when you click on this page is that you have the stacked bar chart that's showing, and those are showing the gender categories. Now here we do have sort of an other category at the bottom, and that's the blue band. And then you've got your male and your female band. We're moving in this direction for each of the 3 demographic categories that you saw on the previous page, and I think NBT has left this as the default page for each of our dashboards so that we can see it. And I'm going to come back to that in a couple of minutes. Just like the other page, the festival profile page for this dashboard page and the comparison tools, you've got your 3 different options for how you want to look at your data. We've asked them to clean up the categories that you see in this list on the left. You'll remember that in June, these were the questions as they were written, and because our questions were different in year 1 and year 2, that created a little bit of a mess. And so what we're focusing on now is just the topic, whether it's a question about learning, inspiration, fun, etc., etc. Some of you will notice if you chose not to ask the fun question or the careers question this year, instead of a bar graph, you'll see this note that says no available data. And that will be true for some, but not all of us. If you are not interested in having this gender piece on, you can turn it off. Before we do that, though, I want to point out a couple of things. If you click on the Customize button in the top right, you'll see additional filters pop up. There's one filter for each of the demographic categories that you saw on the profile page. And so you can see age, gender, and ethnicity. All of those filters work right now. And so you can look at your data using the different categories underneath each of those filters. It's not yet sophisticated enough to show the group by group breakout the way that gender is. And so that's the difference between what's currently going on with the other 2 filters and the functionality that we have for gender. We will be providing the same stacked bar charts for those others. We just haven't gotten that far in the process yet. Some of the other key details that they've added, if you still have that top responses by gender filter turned on, you can see that we have the overall means in the comparison metrics down below, the overall mean for the festival, and then the female mean and the male mean. We had a request for adding in standard deviations, and so you can see those now as well, and then your total number of respondents down below. If you turn off the responses by gender filter, then you'll just see one solid colored bar for each of the ratings, if that's your preference. And I think I am going to stop there and let you guys play around a little bit further and see if there are other questions that come up. So if you have a question or a comment, raise your hand and we will unmute your mic. Jordan, what say you?
Hi there.
Hi.
I have a question. So actually I have 2 questions here. I think you answered this, but I just wanted to be sure I understood. Where the checkbox is for responses by gender, is the intention for future versions to have also checkboxes for responses by ethnicity, responses by age?
Yes.
Okay. And then connected to that is in the stacked bar chart, will you break out the percentages for each of the color bars?
I hope so. That is a question we haven't asked them yet. The stacked bar was a little bit of a surprise. What we had asked for was side-by-sides, and the assumption there was that when you floated over it, the percentage would pop up at the top and you would know it. I think they should be able to do that with these as well, but we haven't had that conversation yet. They rolled this out about a week ago. So we will make a note of that. It definitely needs to happen. Right now, you have the means to work with, which is great, because that's really what you would want to eyeball if you were thinking about doing a statistical analysis to determine if there was a gender difference in your ratings. But I agree with you that the percentages under each column would be more useful than what we have now. The other thing to note about the percentages, for those of you out there who don't look at charts a lot, is that you will notice as you go from one metric to the other that the percentages in your y-axis change. So you can see for hours, we go from 55% on the learning variable to 50% when it comes to inspiration, and then it goes up to 65% for fun. So be careful when you're looking at these. You can't just look at the size of the bar and assume that you're looking at equal percentages and equal numbers. And again, that's where the comparison metrics down at the bottom, I think, become really important in helping to think about what this visualization is showing and what kind of assumptions you should and should not be making based on what you think you're seeing. Any other questions or comments?
Karen, I sent you a few direct chats with questions that they had been typing in.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see those.
I can. Hang on.
Yeah, I think they're the last 3 are questions that have been sent to me.
Okay. Becky, type your question in the chat if we don't already have it, since it looks like your mic is not working. Tina, hi. STEM as an object in the learning question. Sorry, let me include the rest of the group. So Tina, who you guys haven't gotten to meet yet in person, but Tina Phillips is one of our advisors. She is based out of Cornell and is the lead on the Devise scales that you guys have all heard me talk about a fair bit. And Tina wondered why we didn't include STEM as the object in the learning question. And I think we probably do include STEM as the object of the learning question on the actual survey. But what NBT has done is tried to streamline the wording and what's being presented here. And so I will have to double check and see if I'm being honest about that or not. Oh, actually, hang on, because I have a big stack of surveys right here. Nope, it actually is as written. And I don't have a good answer for you. And can't remember why we did that. If anybody else does, then feel free to jump in. All right. Agatha is asking about the
Karen,
category. Yeah.
this is Catherine. I think when we made the decisions 2 years ago at the in-person meeting about the wording, we felt that given that it was everything at the event was STEM oriented, that it was a lot of people voiced the opinion that we didn't need to use the acronym in this case, and that if they learned something new, it would be in STEM.
By default.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
That's my memory. I don't know.
Agatha is asking if student is the category for anyone under 15 and if there's a way to see data for children separated by age. And so I think that student is anybody 18 and under. I will double check that and make sure that we know how they've done the coding there. If you wanted to look at an individual group of children, you would go under your age filter and just select the particular age group that you wanted to look at. You can also, if 18 and under doesn't feel authentic to you and you want to just look at middle schoolers for some reason, you could go in and try to slice and dice the data, adding a couple of groups together, or elementary and middle. Maybe you click on just the 5 through 9-year-olds and the 10 through 14-year-olds, and it would show you the data for those two groups combined. All right. Let me just zip up through the attendee list one more time to see if anybody else has their hand up. Thank you, Taylor, for the questions. Denise, hello. And I'm going to do a quick intro of Denise. Denise is our new statewide K-12 coordinator in North Carolina. And Denise, you are now live.
Thank you. So I tried turning on a category for both age and URM, and it told me no data is available, and now it will not let me turn those categories off so I can get back to where data is available.
Huh. So that's new.
I can get to it if I go all the way back to the profile and then back to the dashboard, but I can't get it if I stay in the dashboard.
I do not know if anybody, and so we'll have to ask NBT about, you know, how the system can be broken and then fixed in that way. If anybody else has anything wonky like that going on, please make sure you email it to Taylor afterwards so that we can put it on the next punch list for NBT. All right, Denise, I put your hand down, but if I cut you off too soon, I apologize, and feel free to raise it again and we'll come back. Hi, Paula.
Hi. To answer the question, you click on Customize and select how you want to customize the chart, but then there's an X next to, if you click on Student, there's an X next to it. So if you X it out, it'll go away.
Ah.
It will uncustomize.
It will uncustomize. Hi, Yvonne.
Hi.
Denise, did that work?
It actually doesn't if you, like you're looking at North Carolina, for example, so if you go under Customize and you pick an age range, any age range, and then you also turn on ethnicity, you'll see that everything will just disappear, and you cannot turn anything off because it has disappeared.
Oh.
Then you go back to Festival Profile and then back to the dashboard.
Yeah, that I got that to work. I just wasn't sure if there was another way.
So we have asked them to allow us to segment the data in that way. So Denise, I like where you're going with trying to add data in from multiple groups. So if, for example, you know, it was of interest, and you'll see while it was, to North Carolina to look at underrepresented middle school students compared to those who are in middle school but not from groups that are underrepresented in STEM, we're hoping that the continued development of this will allow you to do those extra filters and slices so that you can look at the comparisons in that way. They have not yet made filters that are sophisticated enough to do that. And so even if Denise was able to turn on those filters, it would show the cumulative ratings for people in those categories, but it wouldn't show the segmented ratings, which is probably what she and most of the rest of us would be looking for. So we're headed in that direction, but we're not quite there yet. All right. Here I come, Kishore. The comparison tools page. This page is almost exactly like the page that you just saw, although you'll notice that now you've got a comparison bar for your festival. So the orange bar is your festival, the green bar is the rest of the EvalFest community. And you've got some different filter options here as well. And those are in the bottom right corner. The filter categories that you are seeing in the bottom right are the same that we looked at together when we were in Boston in June. And so you can look at your festival compared to all others. You can look at your festival compared to those that are of similar size, similar parent institution as far as where the festival is actually based, and then of similar geography.
Hey, Karen, I hate to cut you off, but Jordan had another question about the dashboard. She didn't want to get too far. He didn't want to get too far away from it.
Is it, all right. Jordan, is it possible that you muted yourself? I can't seem to unmute you. There we go.
Yes.
Hi.
Yes, that is very possible. I did that. Just to follow up on Denise's issue, yeah, whenever you get that error message that no data is available, it would be nice if there was a like a reset button available at that point, because you can't undo. And then my other question is, it would be nice also to compare 2015 and 2016 data on the dashboard for your festival.
Yes, thank you for saying that. We've asked them to add a filter for that as well. So in hopefully the next iteration, instead of, what you can do right now is clunky, right? Like whatever category you're on, you can look at 15 and 16 and toggle back and forth between the two, but that's clunkier than it really, that's probably too clunky to actually be useful. And so the next iteration, we hope and expect, will have a filter that will allow you to look at years side by side as well. Thank you for raising that. I mentioned, I had intended to mention it and just forgot.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me find Kishore on this list. All right, you ready?
Jordan asked one of my questions, which is, I think, the most useful thing would be comparison amongst ourselves. And then the second thing is it possible to get a list of the festivals that are noted in the comparison filter? So when it says similar size, I'd like to know which festivals that is.
Yes, and I think these are the categories that we sorted ourselves into at the first annual meeting, but I think you're exactly right. Like, I have no memory for who was in one category versus the other, and so we can certainly create a cheat sheet for everybody so that you can know who you share a particular category with. I think the more we learn, the more and more important this particular page is going to be. For those of you who have talked with Taylor or with me over the last couple of weeks to work on your survey changes for this year, you'll know that we are still intending to have comparison filters by event type. So you'll remember that you've submitted characteristic forms for every event where you've collected data over the last couple of years. And so, you know, we know if it was an expo versus a lecture event versus a demonstration. We know who the target audience was, what the venue was, if the event was free. And what has happened with those data so far is that we were left trying to merge all of that information to an open-ended response. And so NBT has had some success in creating filters and applying those different data points to the event names, but we haven't been as successful as we would like to be. And so everyone will start using an event number code this year, and you'll learn more about that when the time comes to plan your survey and implement your survey. so that we can do a much more direct alignment for every single event where we collect data starting in year 3. The next iteration of this will have comparison filters for the event characteristics that we have been able to match up for 2015 and 2016. So that additional level of filters for event characteristics is coming as well. All right, I'm just gonna zoom back up the list and see if anybody has questions. Jordan, you appear to be self-muted again and have your hand up. But if you have another question or comment, hi.
Hi. I show myself as hand down, but that's okay. I do have a question following up on the shores. The comparison filters, it would be good to get a definition of what is a similar size festival to me. I don't know. Is there a range that we have defined somewhere? I don't remember what those are. So that would also be helpful in the sheet. Yeah. And I'm guessing it would be helpful for everybody to to not just see your own list, but where other people are too. You'll see an example of something that we did here in a couple of minutes where the categories that we have on the dashboard right now weren't really quite what we wanted them to be. And so we went in and created our own. Size was determined, actually I think we did it in 2 ways when we were in Atlanta. I think we did it based on number of events and by attendance. And so we can certainly provide the different breakdowns and then help people understand which exact filter is being used here so that you can think about whether that's a meaningful way to slice the data for you or not so much. Okay. Roshni, it looks like your hand is up and you're also self-muted. So if you want to unmute, then you have the floor. Hi.
Hi. Is there any chance to add festival-specific questions to the dashboard and maybe year-by-year comparison for when the year-to-year comparisons are added, to do comparisons for those? Because I think these are all core questions right now.
These are all core questions. And I think this is where, well, I guess maybe this is a topic for conversation. Our current plans are to limit it to the core questions and to keep adding filters so that we can learn from what we all have in common. And then the plan from the beginning was that it was up to each individual festival and festival evaluator to do the analysis of questions that were unique to their individual survey. What we have done in the past is expand beyond the core questions for the analysis updates that we provide of the community level data. And Jen and I are planning to do that as part of next month's webinar. And so you will see a more community level profile that spans out beyond the comparison page. I think we're currently up to about 245 different questions across our 24 festivals. And so we don't have the capacity to add all of that in to the dashboard. It would be possible if the filters did not feel as meaningful as having more questions available, then we might be able to sort of make a decision as a community to shift priorities in that way so that we have access to a larger number of questions and fewer filters, or vice versa. Yeah, sure. Hi.
Hi. I have a few questions. They should all be relatively short. And a couple comments. So as I'm clicking through, I'm not really finding pretty big distinctions between my data and other festivals, regardless of the comparison filters I apply. And because I can't see other people's dashboards, I'm wondering if that's the experience everyone is having too. I mean, a lot of the areas where there's differences, we're talking about a couple percentage points, and when you take in the standard deviation into account, that's not a fairly significant result. And I'm curious if that's true across the group, and I'll put a pause on that question. The second thing I had was, is there any sort of meaningful use of standard deviation that you've heard from any festival sites? I mean, I understand what it is, but I'm curious if anyone is using that data that's being generated. And then lastly, is there any way to look at the data for all the festivals as a whole rather than just comparison against my festival?
Okay. I'm going to get lost in answering those. so keep me
I'll
up.
remind you of them.
So as far if other people are seeing the same thing that Kishore is on the as far as minor and maybe insignificant differences between your own festival and the rest of the community, regardless of filter, type that into the chat so that we have a record of it and can go back and look. Your second question was about standard deviations, I think. Is that right?
Yes, if anyone is meaningfully using that data that's being generated.
Yeah. This is the first time anybody's had access to that particular data point on the dashboard. And so looking at the straight standard deviation and trying to think about whether there's any there is probably new to everybody on the call. The standard deviation would be wrapped into any statistical analysis that anybody's done to look at group differences or differences year to year. And so it would be included if people are doing those kinds of statistics. And, standard deviation is funny because it's typically, I get asked for it a lot by scientists, but non-scientists don't seem to be as concerned. And so we added it by request. Somebody came up and asked for it at the June meeting, and that's why it's now available. I don't know that I would really use it in this context unless I was also using it with the statistical analysis that I do in SPSS. If anybody else on the call knows exactly how they would use it, then please raise your hand because I think we'd all love to hear from you. And then the third question is about, I think, just what does EvalFest look like overall?
Correct.
So you will see some of that in the presentation next month. The longer term plan for this is that the homepage for the dashboard will be open to the public and it will have EvalFest level data. And that's what the default page will be. So that if people go to the EvalFest website and click on dashboard, they won't be able to see any of our individual festivals dashboards, but they will get to see the aggregated data and to use some of the larger level filters. So they would be able to look by year, by festival type filters, and by event characteristic filters. But we have prioritized all of the partners first, and that page is still sort of down the line. So the only access you have to that information right now is what comes up on the green bars that you see, and then the means associated with it. So, did I get everything?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. Any final questions or comments? Leanne, hi.
No.
Leanne quickly just put her hand down. All right, going back on mute. Lovely to talk to you, Leanne. I'll talk to you and Sarah in a bit. Okay. All right. So if you have questions that come up as you continue to play, please send them in. Taylor and I are happy to help address those in any way we can. What I wanted to do with the last few minutes that we have is show some examples of different data visualizations that we've done here for different reasons to build on part of that data storytelling piece. So the early conversations that we've had with some of the spring festivals when we've asked what they want more of, what they want to think about more together. The presentations that Amanda gave to us, I think, resonated with a lot of us. Nothing that I'm about to show is anywhere as slick as what Amanda does, but it is with data that you now have access to and could pull straight from the dashboard. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about the kinds of data stories that we've been asked to tell in North Carolina and how we've done that with EvalFest data, so that you can think about maybe additional ways to use the information that you now have available to you. So a few years ago, we were asked to go back to all of the data that we had from 2012 on and look to see what differences in all of the different ratings looks like by gender and by underrepresented versus non-underrepresented minority group. And so you see a data display of those results here. If you want or need something like this for your festival, the worksheet for this is embedded in this PowerPoint slide. And so I can send it to you. You can get rid of our numbers, put in your numbers, and it should be good to go. That will be true for all of the slides you're going to see today. So if you want to take these and run with them for something that you know you have coming up, they will be there. The story for this actually wasn't really that interesting. We did have a more interesting story to tell around this piece of information. So there was a debate going on the North Carolina team a couple of years ago where we weren't seeing the number of underrepresented minority people come to programs that we wanted to. And so internally, the programs team was saying to the marketing team, hey, we don't think we're doing the right kind of marketing. And the marketing team came back with, well, maybe we're doing the exact kind of marketing and you're just not offering the right kind of programming. And so that was really when we got this request, hey, let's go back, let's look by gender, let's look at underrepresented versus non-underrepresented groups and see how their ratings stack up and what we can see. And you can see that back in 2012, 2013, there was a statistically significant difference in how people were rating our programming here in North Carolina, and that has evened out over time. And so these data and the gender data are now available to you on the dashboard if you wanted the means. If you do want or need to go beyond that and do some statistical analysis, you would have to shift gears a little bit. And we know that we still need to provide some of you with support in that area, and it's still on the to-do list for this year. But this is, a direction you could go with your dashboard data if you wanted to, or if this is the kind of story you needed to think about telling. We've heard from a lot of you that or not a lot, but a good number, that you've been doing this for a while, the questions haven't changed year from year, and that the story is pretty much the same year after year in your survey data. And that is certainly true here in North Carolina as well. And this is a slide that we created for the first time last year and presented it again this year. It was requested that we not get into the weeds of any of the numbers, but that instead we talk about trends in the data. And so this was our attempt to say, we had some good steady gains early on. We started out pretty high up on our 5-point scale. We had these small but meaningful differences for a couple of years, but things have sort of flattened out. And so this was our sort of due diligence slide, but also our we don't need to talk about this anymore slide. And so if you want or need this, or if this is part of the story that you want to tell, you don't even really need data for this. There are no real data in this slide. But you can sort of think about whether you're building toward this kind of a story as you look year to year across the data that you have, or if maybe you've got a different story to tell where you do have important differences that you want to show and highlight in a different way. We did use comparison groups this year for our advisory board presentation, and we used the EvalFest data. And so this is a slide that I created and showed to them, and it takes a little bit of explanation. So you guys will all recognize the categories down the side. Our advisors recognize those too. They've been seeing the same data for 4 or 5 years now. What the gray bar represents are the festivals that are most like our festival here in size and tenure. So I downloaded the entire EvalFest database, isolated the festivals that I knew to be the most like us on those 2 categories, and then used that as my comparison group. The green line on this slide is 4 out of 5 on the scale. And so you can see as a community, our ratings are quite high. And we know that from the other presentations we've done over time too. So the story here was a success story and something to sort of shout about for us, because if we look at our data for North Carolina, this is us. And so we took the data from the EvalFest data set and used it with our advisors last year to talk about a success story, which was this one, an area where we're in the middle of the pack, and then an area that might be a conversation point or something to think about. And so this was our slide for middle of the pack. You guys will recognize this from the June meeting. This is a slide that shows the 3 categories that we ask about for people who are returning to the festival for a second time. So the questions ask if they talked about last year's festival to anybody after they left, if they did an activity related to last year's festival topics, or if they looked for more information about a festival topic. And the numbers that you see on this slide are our data here in North Carolina, but these are the data for the rest of the festivals most like us. And so you can see some people are doing better than we are on all 3 of these categories. Some people have slightly lower ratings. We're all doing quite well, and North Carolina is right in the middle of the pack. And so it's sort of a different kind of success story on this particular slide. Then we had a maybe missed opportunity slide to talk about with the advisors. And so the story from this 24% of potential first encounters was our way to spin the data that come from the question that asks if they've interacted with somebody who works in science or engineering in the last year. And 24% of our respondents on last year's survey said no, they had not had the chance to do that. And so these are people who, if they come to the festival, and the festival includes scientists and engineers, have the potential for this first encounter of the year because they came to the festival. And that's sort of a story that we've liked to talk about and tell here in North Carolina. What we found when we compared the number of this 24% to the number of people who reported that they actually did have that interaction is that it was only 10%. And so we have 14% of people who could be a missed opportunity. Now, we know that not all 14% of them were missed opportunities because some of them didn't attend an expo where we know there were scientists. Some of them went to a local library program that featured a science topic, but not necessarily a scientist. So one thing that we haven't done yet, but that we need to do, is to go back through the data and identify, of the 14% that we're missing here, how many of them really did have an encounter that they didn't even recognize, and or is that important? And so those were sort of the ways that we used data like those that are now available on the dashboard in the last year to talk to our advisors and to present to some other stakeholders, and then to have internal conversations as well about what we think we need to be thinking about and doing as a result of the data that we have. I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any questions or comments to make about any of these.
Karen, I sent you a chat from Amy Pierce.
Oh, awesome. Let me zoom. In the comparison data shown, did you make any statistical adjustments for large differences in sample sizes? Amy, I'm going to zoom back up to you. Does your mic work? Can you talk?
I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
I can. Hi.
Oh, hi. I came in late. Sorry.
I know you was in class. I'm sorry.
So you may have covered that already.
When you're at, so let me go back.
You had said that you had compared, I guess, the North Carolina Science Festival and the ratings to other festivals that you deemed to be similar, and it was about 3 or 4 slides.
Yep.
This one. And so I just wonder, in those comparisons, and then also, in the dashboard that we have access to, in playing around with that, there are some big differences in sample size for Arkansas Science Festival, and then when I click on, the other festivals, either with similar venues or that are in our same geographical region. And so in any, data that you're presenting, are you making adjustments for sample sizes?
Yeah, I did not. And I'll have to go back and look. I think that the sample, that the two groups we ended up with were relatively similar in sample size, but I need to go back and double check. That's a good question. It also reminds me of two things. So a question that Kishore asked back in June, and then a comment that John Besley made on the webinar in the fall, is that we probably do need to start thinking about being a little bit more sophisticated in data that were collected using the random sample method versus data that are consensus data, and thinking about whether we handle those together as though they were completely equivalent, or whether we think about weighting them or doing something else in the analysis. And I have not done any of that in the analysis that I've done here. I'm not sure if anybody else on the line has, but I'd be thrilled to know about that as well. Amy, I think your point is also really good in that it might be most meaningful for you guys to use the similar size if it is based on attendance. And so I like your question in part because even though we've got access to some of these filters, I don't think we should all assume that all of these comparisons make sense. So
the other thing, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
The other thing about that, though, when I did that comparison, similar in size, there were still thousands, I think, of, compared, to 2 hours. Because I think this was a comment that Kishore made. We don't know exactly who's being grouped into that yet. We can't, just be really selective.
Right, right.
Is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
That's true.
So that's all of the other festivals that are, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so when you look at, so there is the All Festivals tab, even the similar size, if that's done by attendance, it's probably your festival against
all of the others in that group.
Yeah, I mean, so it could be your festival against, 7 others.
Right.
Part of what I think, again, I'll have to go look at the sample size that we did use. Part of what I think worked to our advantage for the comparison slides that I created and showed is that I knew exactly I picked the festivals that went into that. And I looked across categories. So when I sat down to do it, I didn't feel like size alone made sense to look at. I wanted to look at size and seniority, which isn't one of our filters. And so I went in and created my own set of filters, which all of you could do as well, although that may be beyond the scope of what you want to tackle, or what you have the resources and the time to tackle if you are a volunteer-based crew. The other thing that we can do, if it would be helpful and if people do feel the need to use the dashboard to get a running start, which is really what it was intended for, is to sort of give a quick way for everybody to have easy access to the data and to start to think about whether there are ways to compare data across time or across key groups of interest. And if you think you see something, to know exactly where to put your effort. So if you are on a shoestring budget and you don't have tons of resources to put toward your analysis, you don't have to start from scratch. You can use the dashboard and the differences that you're seeing to give yourselves a running start, or at least that's the hope. If it turns out the filters that we currently have are not working for us, we can change those. We can also think about providing everybody with a database, a clean database at the end of every year, so that you could go in and isolate your data in relation to the 1 or 2 festivals that you knew really were the most like yours. And you would have the ability to make those choices. You can do that now because we all have access to all of the data, but it is a heavier lift. I mean, honestly, it was a heavier lift than I wanted to do. So I'm guessing that means it's probably a heavier lift than most of the others of you would want to do. Or have the resources to do as well. So if there are ways that we can be helpful in that regard, then zip those off to me or to Taylor, and we'll see what we can help people tackle so that you are able to make comparisons that do feel the most meaningful to you. All right.
Karen, I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
I've got 2 questions that I sent you in the chat.
Thank you.
From Tina and Paula.
Oh, sorry. So Paula, I may have misspoke. So Paula said that I said that my PowerPoint and the Excel files for today's presentation can be found on the dashboard. They're not on the dashboard, but I can email them to you if that would be of interest so that you can build off of those. So sorry if I confused anybody about that. Tina is asking if there's any concern about the overwhelming positive responses. Does it provide enough meaningful information? That is a great question, and it's a question that many of us are struggling with. We have several people that are interested in the possibility in the next year or so of moving away from the attendee survey to start scratching under the surface using some different methods. And so I don't know that there's really much of anything to be done with the items that we currently have. But we are interested in learning more and being able to have new and different things to say about the events we produce. And so we're looking at a short menu of items that we're hoping people will be able to play with in the next year to start to answer some of those questions. I'm going to use that actually to segue into my last slide. Looking ahead. So we are going to be coming together again as a group in June. We are hoping that everybody will be able to be there for most of the final day of IPSEC, if not the final day. So that is June 6th. And then we will be together that evening and then have all day on June 7th. And part of what we're going to be working on and focusing on is, we think, the mini grant piece, and really trying to take that and own it and flex it in a different way than we were able to do in 2016. And some of those more innovative methods that do allow us to scratch beneath the surface are the exact things that we'll be looking at. I also mentioned the February webinar is going to be a report out of year 2 data that Jen and I are going to do. The March webinar, we're going to have Denise Young back for the month, and she's going to talk about the results from the social network analysis. The April and May webinars we have ideas for, but nothing confirmed yet, so I'm not going to share those just yet, but we should have announcements about that hopefully by the time the next newsletter goes out in a couple of weeks. The only other thing to say is that the spring survey will launch by the end of this month, so Taylor and I are plugging away like mad trying to get that ready. Thank you again for those of you who have contributed to that effort. And thanks to everybody for tuning in today. If you have extra questions or comments, please send them along. Otherwise, have a great weekend and a good month, and we will see you here in about a month's time. Thanks, everybody.